Hi, and welcome to the ARC podcast with Jen and Lindsey. How you doing, Lindsey?
I'm hanging in there. How are you doing, Jen?
I'm pretty good. We all got through the flu. I just want to
Woohoo!
send out any encouraging thoughts to anybody who's in the middle of it because it was a rough patch here at the Algae House. We've never quite had a flu like that before, but both kids are back in school. So you know me, like if the kids are at school, I'm
No.
good. It's a
Isn't
good
it crazy how you're just like thriving when your children are in school? And then when they are at home, you're like, how do I do this? Like, there's this
I know.
tiny human here bothering me.
I don't know
So
how we did the last
Whit
few
missed
days.
11 days and Vivi missed 3. So we didn't have the flu that you had. We had 2 plague viruses that hit together, and Whitman had the perfect storm. So he went back for the first time in 11 days yesterday. So
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple months. I don't think I've talked to a single parent in the last month who hasn't gone through just the craziest illness that they've ever gone through, like since, I think
yeah,
COVID of 2020.
we thought Vivi had strep, and then it turned out to be a stomach bug, just symptom wise. And then Whitman had it presented like the flu, but it wasn't the flu. And then he got her stomach bug,
Oh,
and it
and then
was
we all get it. And then it's
oh
like if the
yeah,
mom's at home,
Jeremy
yeah.
and I got it.
Yeah.
I did not think I was going to
Well,
make it to today, to be honest. On Sunday afternoon, Vivi was like, "You look awful."
yeah,
I
I
think.
know. Don't you love how honest the girls are in our lives?
He's like, "You look so tired," and I'm like, "Well, the last 24 hours have not been great, Vivi." Like,
We made it, and we've had to reschedule this great guest of
I
ours a
know
couple
I have
times.
felt terrible about it.
But I'm so excited he's here with us today. So I'm going to introduce Jeremy Morris. Thanks for coming on the pod, Jeremy. Jeremy is the executive director at Ohio Statewide Independent Living Council. And before joining the SILC in 2017, Jeremy had spent almost 10 years working in independent living, previously serving as the executive director of the Access Center in Dayton, Ohio, and finance coordinator at the Western Reserve ILC in Warren, Ohio. So thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you both. I'm excited to be here today. It's a fun opportunity to get to come and talk about what we do as a council and the work that we get to do alongside the Centers for Independent Living. So thank you again for having me today.
Yeah, so please tell us about yourself and how you got into this role that you're in right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did cover a good part of my background. I've been with our state council now since 2016, I think it was. I've lost track of my own time that I've been here. I really loved getting to do the work here and getting to be involved and see some of the things, across the entire state, getting to work with everyone. Before that, getting to go and work in the Dayton area at the center there. That was a lot of fun getting to really help, because it was a center that was rebuilding. It was, kind of, getting itself back together and even now seeing where they're still moving forward and the work that they're doing now. I get really excited just to keep watching what's going on back there. But I started off at that first center that I worked at, actually interning when I was in college. And it was a situation that I had previously known, some of the staff that were there, and they just needed some extra help in the summer. And my running joke for a while was I started there kind of volunteering and interning, and I got completely hooked on everything about the philosophy and mission of independent living that I just never left. So I spent a lot of time there in the Youngstown area working at that center, and here I am now.
Awesome. Yeah, I think when a lot of us think about the Centers for Independent Living, like at least my mind goes directly to Judy Human and like the leaders of in Berkeley, California, where these, like, I think it was the original center, right,
Mhm.
for independent living, kind of like broke the ground for self-advocacy and all basically all great big federal laws that we have today, IDEA, ADA, and like this all kind of started in the 70s. And obviously, there's a really long disability history. You guys have a nice history on your website that kind of outlines where y'all came from and even prior. But how has that history shaped like what you're doing now at the Statewide Independent Living Council?
It has been I mean, that's obviously been a huge thing. I mean, we have some monumental leaders that have come through the disability rights movement. And even here in Ohio, we've had a lot of really great leaders. We as an organization just celebrated our 30-year anniversary. So
That's
we got to do
incredible.
a lot of reflection of our own as an organization. And one of the things that we decided to do at our celebration was we did awards this year because we wanted to find ways to keep honoring some of the history, but then continue as we go forward to keep honoring what's going on. But one of those awards was named after a previous Center for Independent Living director, Doris Brennan. She was an individual. She was there on the White House lawn when the ADA was signed. I mean, she was a fierce leader in the disability rights movement, and she helped start two different centers for independent living here in Ohio. So it's we have a lot of our own history, but what's interesting is kind of the evolution of the independent living movement itself. It did start out in Berkeley at that very first center, and centers all over the country have now formed and continue forming. And it's really, I love to see when new centers come together from that organic push within a community. You find an active disability community that's wanting to push for change. We recently had something like that in Athens. There was a very active group of people down there, and they had been reaching out to us. So, as part of our outreach to get information on the state plan for independent living, we went and met with the community down there. And we heard of the work that they were doing and what they wanted from a center for independent living. And one of the current centers actually went and expanded and went into the Athens area because they had that community support. And that's, to me, that I love to see centers forming in that organic nature, because a major component that has stayed through the test of time and is actually part of the federal law around centers is that consumer control element.
Mhm.
These organizations are run by individuals with disabilities. A majority of the board of directors has to be people with disabilities. A majority of the management staff has to be people with disabilities, and a majority of the entire staff. So it's every level of the organization, from the directional leadership at the board, the day-to-day supervision and management, and then the actual frontline staff that's working in the community. It has to be run by individuals with disabilities, which creates, to me, such a unique opportunity that when somebody comes to a center for independent living, you're getting to work alongside somebody that has the lived experience and knows
Mhm.
what it is, that you don't have to explain why you're there, what you're going through. There's somebody there that's going to understand exactly where you're at, exactly what's going on. And because of that, often the centers, they know a lot of the ins and outs of how to get through some of the overly complex systems and all of the things that we have to navigate through on a regular basis. So that's one of, that's one of my favorite things about the centers is the fact that we have that mandated structure that is just, it continues to reinforce that philosophy. And since those early days of when centers started, they have added there's been new core services that have been added to the centers too. So, the services that every center out there has to provide is the information and referral. So anyone in the community can call and connect with a center and ask, hey, I'm trying to find information about this. You can call and talk to a center. Anyone can do that. There's actual, the skills training. So, there's every center does things in ways that fit their community best. So some have, like skill training workshops. Some do a lot of individual one-on-one skill training sessions. The peer support aspect that I've already talked a little bit about, the advocacy work, and then in more recent years, there were some new services that were added, and that includes the youth transition. So working with kids that are leaving high school and going on to what's next.
Mhm.
Diversion, trying to prevent people from going into institutional settings to try and help keep people in the community, and then the actual transition from an institutional setting back into the community. So those last three they're newer services that have been added. But yeah, those are the things that every center has to provide, and then every center does a lot on top of that.
Yeah, I'm learning so much. Okay, so the peer support I think is huge, because I think when I was just on another podcast is like the number one thing I think I get from people is like, I want to be an advocate. How do I start to advocate? And it's like, you need to meet other people doing this. First of all, you need to just know what your challenges are and start from there. You've already been doing it. But find your network of people, because there are, like you said, there are some pretty phenomenal people following in the footsteps of people like Doris Brennan and the Judy Humans of the world. There's a lot of people here in Ohio who, I mean, I'm just really thankful in my role at the ARC that I can follow what the people that have the lived experience are doing in the advocacy realm. I basically don't take any steps forward in any policy part of my job without first consulting with people with lived experience, people with disabilities. And I'm really grateful to have a nice group that I've just continued to build since my kids were diagnosed when they were little, reaching out to people with autism and Down syndrome and just kind of building my network. But I think that's huge. The youth transition, I am like super excited about,
I
Jeremy, because
know. I'm so pumped for
Lindsay,
that.
Lindsay and I both have kids who are,
Mhm.
and my Jack is 13. So, next year we're going to start our transition stuff at school. And it's just nice to know that we have that other resource there.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
And part of some of the youth work too that the centers are doing, several of the centers, we are working on a project with OOD, or Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. I try not to use acronyms as much as possible, but they slip out every now and then. The Regional Youth Leadership Forum. And that has been, I think we're on the fourth or fifth. I can't remember how many years we've been working on that project. It had a very rocky start, because the first year that we were going to do it was 2020 in that spring, and we had to suddenly figure out how to make everything virtual. So we've gotten everything back down to being in person again, but it's, high school students with disabilities that are interested in wanting to get involved with more leadership opportunities. There's a week-long program that centers are doing that it's a really great opportunity, because the centers are the ones putting together the content. They're the ones, they're bringing in other people and other experts. And it's, again, you're seeing disability-led services come forward, and you're seeing people with disabilities running this and talking about their careers, talking about what they've done. And it really helps build up some of the skills as these kids are trying to figure out, what am I going to do after high school? Where do I want to go next? So it's always been, a huge thing that, the center's working more with youth, but that youth leadership forum, it really has been a fun project to get to work with the centers on too.
it's exciting because
So exciting.
representation matters. And
Mhm.
so knowing, I think for my son, he has no idea like what he wants to do as a job yet. Of course, I didn't either when I was 13. Well, maybe I did. But I think it makes a difference to know people with autism in your community who are working and who are doing like what they actually dreamed of doing, you know? Like I have some friends who are actually doing like exactly what they wanted to do when they were kids. And there were a lot of people who didn't think that they would be able to do it, and they are. So it, and those people matter, their stories matter. So I think that's really cool. And I'm excited that there's a week-long program for that. So
I
tell
know.
us about like what are your advocacy priorities? Because at the ARC we have some priorities of our own,
Mhm.
and I'm just seeing if they align with maybe some of yours there. Mhm.
That is a question, and that's somewhat always been a work in progress because our focus has always been everything.
Yes.
um
Same.
that's the problem, is there's so many things. We always have, every time we do surveys and we try and get input, you know we have those general themes that are always there:
Yeah.
housing, transportation, healthcare, employment. Those are always going to be some of the major things that we are always looking at different things, trying to figure out how do we make improvements. Some of the big areas that we currently have a lot of work going on, is around, especially in the Medicaid side of the world, the consumer directed and self-directed services, having those become more tangible throughout the state through all levels of things. One thing that we always try and figure out is, a big part of independent living is the way we work. It's inclusion of all forms of disability. And we really believe in the fact that everything out there should be accessible to people no matter what form of disability there may be.
Yeah.
So we try and ensure that equal access to all programs. And that's where, when we see things like the self-directed services, when we see things even just in the Medicaid waiver space, trying to figure out how do we help push that one waiver, if there's a service available, that should then be available to all people who are receiving those services, because that's how we build a better structure as things go forward. So that is one of the huge issues that we're seeing a lot right now. Obviously the direct care workforce is a major issue that is being discussed a lot within our network. So we have a lot of there's always going to be a lot of the priorities going on. But the main issue areas that we do focus a lot are that housing, transportation, healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. For the piece about like where you're talking about with making everything accessible for people with different disabilities, Lindsay and I are always worried about the autism piece, of course, because
Mhm.
of our kids, but because I think like all of our laws, when we look at IDEA and ADA, and it all kind of comes from a place of physical disability, or intellectual disability, like people with Down syndrome more, that's more of like the focus. And what we kind of run into a lot of times is that the systems just were not set up for autism as a living disability. I think it was mostly because people didn't obviously understand it. They thought it was like a childhood disability that people grew out of. And so what I'm wondering, are there people that you're working with? Because I always am like trying to make sure that this is covered. Like when we're doing new 504 regs right now, at the
Mhm.
federal level, are there people with autism working on that? Because if not, I'm worried, we're not really getting it at the source. So it sounds like you guys are doing that, and that you have people on your council who have autism, and that maybe giving their lived experience on
And
this.
I'm glad you bring up our council representation,
Yay.
because we
Mhm.
are currently massively recruiting.
Oh, good.
Aw.
So our council members, we have a 19-person board of directors. Of those 19, 14 of those people are voting members, We have 5 that are state agency representatives that are on the board. But we have to have a majority of my board has to be individuals with disabilities. And we try and figure out within 14 people to create as much diversity as possible in the geographic representation, in the racial and ethnic representation, in the disability representation. It can be very difficult with 14 people. I wish we could have a massively large council that I could have ample representation from so many unserved and underserved communities across Ohio. But I would love to see more applications coming in. Our council members are governor appointed, so there is a process to go through. We do have the information is available on my website, and we will help anyone go through that process. And what we like to do is, if somebody's interested in joining the council, they can serve for 2 3-year terms in a row, and then you have to take a little bit of a break off. But if anyone's interested, I like to set up a meeting with them, get to talk with them, just talk about everything that our council does, the ins and outs of what it means to be a board member, talk about the application process. And then part of our requirement is we are supposed to be giving input to the governor's office on who is a qualified candidate for our council. So I always try and tell people, if you send us the information, we will make sure it is completed, and we will send it on to the governor's office for you so that they know we have done our role of making sure that we've done an initial screening almost, that individuals are going to meet the needs that we have for the council. So right now, unfortunately, like I said, I think we're losing about half of our council in March. It's a big turnover we have a lot of people finishing up their second term. So it's very unfortunate that we lose so many at once, but it's a great opportunity that, if there's individuals who are interested in having an impact on the statewide level, our council has a lot of work where we talk about advocacy issues. We talk about what's going on in communities. We figure out how we can gauge input and gather feedback from people. And a lot of that goes into the work of the drafting of our 3-year state plan for independent living that gets submitted. So there's a lot of little components to things that we do, but it really is, it's a fun opportunity too. I mean, we end up with such a great group of people that have such different perspectives that come together, and the conversations that come up, and all of our meetings, anyone can attend. Our meetings are open to the public. The information again is right on our website at ohiosilc.org. We have meetings coming up next week, and as we talked a little bit about that, making sure that things are accessible. We have really tried to make the commitment in a post-COVID world of what do meetings look like. While our board members, it is still a requirement that they be in person to be considered present and vote under current state laws. We've made the commitment that we know that there's a lot of individuals from the public who can't easily just come to Columbus for our quarterly board meetings to come there. Even for recruiting board members, it's also difficult to find people from across the state that have access to the transportation to get to Columbus that regularly. But we have a camera system that we use for the council meetings so that you can watch. We have a Zoom stream of the meetings going on, so individuals that are in the public can join in and watch everything that's happening. So the camera system is really cool because it kind of zooms in on whoever is talking. We also make sure that there is captioning provided. So we have an actual caption person, not just the auto captions for our full council meeting. And we have sign language interpreters there for every one of our full council meetings, so that if there are, those are kind of the basic things that we make sure in terms of accommodations. But we also have, again, on the website, there's a section of if there's any other accommodations that individuals from the public may need so that they can participate in the meetings. We want to make our meeting space as open and accessible to anyone as possible. So always love recommendations and ideas too, because we think we've gotten a lot of it down pretty well, and we probably do a better job than a lot of other groups that have these type of open meetings and open meeting requirements. But we really try to pride ourselves on making sure we have the most accessible space we can make.
Yeah. Well, it's hard too to like diversify, making sure you're getting like not only like people from certain parts of the state, because you guys in Columbus just happen to like, you guys always like just kind of pull people around you, and it's like, it's very like human nature to do that. And I do the same thing down here in Southwest Ohio. Like I just always am thinking about my people around here who would be great for it. But then really trying to find people from all over the state. And like you were saying, like in Athens and all of the cool things that they're doing there, it would be neat to like really kind of access the people that are doing the great work in these like smaller, like rural communities, because that's where I think we all, I mean, me included, I'm always just floored by how different the resources are, the accessibility is. When I go to I have my 4 main counties here down here in Southwest Ohio, and then I have 4 to the east that are my more rural counties, and just the difference is, it's a big difference. And it's, I want more representation from those places, so I'm glad you're doing that. And I'll definitely, think about, sending you some of my peeps.
Yeah.
Because you guys do
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that, in the last couple years with our council, we've really tried to work on because at one point in time, yeah, we did have a majority of people seem to be right from Central Ohio.
Yeah.
And right now, actually the three people that we have as voting members who are from Central Ohio, they're all in that group that are leaving. And I was actually looking at some of the applications the other day, and I think I only have like 2 people that have applied so far that are even from the Central Ohio area at this point. So we've gone the opposite direction of we've recruited a lot. We have a lot from the Southwest area, Dayton especially. We've gotten a lot of people from that area. Toledo, we seem to be getting a good amount. So I think
I'm from the
we've done
Toledo
well.
area, so I'm
Okay.
excited that Toledo is being represented.
Yeah, it's to me, it's interesting to look at the trends of, we kind of took a hard look of, we have a lot of Central Ohio, and we seem to get a lot of Northeast Ohio, and now those are areas where we really aren't getting a lot of applications in. So we did good on making sure that we were reaching out to some of the areas that we didn't have as much representation from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're always kind of like taxing the advocates that are like so good at this and that are like always working and always making change, but it's good to give them a little break, bring in and have a mentor, some new blood to get in there and advocate, because they can't be, I'm always trying to tell I take the same advice that you have to take breaks from advocacy sometimes. You just have to, because if you don't, you will burn out pretty quick in this field. So one big priority that we've been looking at is housing. And I know you mentioned that that's always on your radar. Can you give us any like advice or like how you're prioritizing housing, coming from like the independent living center perspective? Because I feel like affordability is just such a barrier that there just needs to be more affordable housing and like vouchers. And I'm trying to figure out from a legislative perspective and from the groups that are already kind of doing this work, like where we can land here at the ARC. And I'm just kind of like asking other orgs, like where's your biggest like priority for housing right now? if that makes
That
sense.
is, yeah, because housing is such a huge facet and topic, and there's so much in housing.
Yeah.
One thing that we were trying to make a big push over the last couple years with the state, especially with some of the funding that had been coming in, of the lack of options and the lack of cohesive options for home modifications. When you look at an individual that needs a home modification, I know when I worked at the centers, it would be, okay, let's go through the list of trying to figure out which of the possible funding options are out there. Maybe they'll qualify for one of these, but they have to live in this area. They have to have an income of this, or they have to own their house, or it just something that we could create a better universal system to help individuals afford these costly home modifications that are out there, until we could maybe get more building to actually, be built with universal design so that we can have an easier time if home modifications are needed, that they're maybe not going to cost, thousands upon thousands of dollars. So those are, I mean, the home modification piece is something that we see a lot of. We see a lot of that. We get a lot of calls. We get a lot of information requested around home modifications. One thing that has been great that I've seen a lot, one of our council members works for COHIO, which is the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. And, I know from talking to her, she has been starting to say more and more in some of the housing related work that she does. It's not just the affordable housing, it's the affordable, accessible housing.
That's right.
Because we have huge lack of affordable housing across the state of Ohio. There's even less affordable, accessible housing in places. I would love to see a day where we have accurate data and information around how much affordable housing actually exists, what wait lists currently look like. I think there's a lot of potential around advocacy on some local levels. One thing I love to give kind of a shout out to one of my hometown areas, Trumbull County, Ohio. The Public Housing Authority, after years of working with community organizations, they actually sent out a list on a regular basis of their properties and the current wait list times for each of those properties. So it was such a huge benefit for all of us agencies and organizations in the community that were working with people. Because if we had a situation where they needed housing immediately, they needed something, we could help show them the list of here's what could be open next month for you. Here's what has some immediate availabilities. Because, it may be everyone's directing people towards one property and that has a 2-year wait list. So how do we help? It helped us help them in prioritizing, where do we show people, giving people the options, of course, of, yeah, if you still want to go on the 2-year wait list, that's fine. And if you have the ability to wait, that's even better. But not everyone has that situation where they can wait for 2 years to find stable housing. So that was such a huge benefit to have, that housing authority that just openly provided that information to us and regularly communicated with the organizations out there of here's the process, here's what's going on. So I think from an advocacy standpoint on a local level for affordable housing, those public housing authorities are going to be the primary resource of providing the housing or knowing of the housing options and seeing what information they can readily put together and give to the community so that one, it the information is powerful just to have and know what resources are out there.
Yeah.
But then to know if because yeah, if you know that there's a property out there that has a 3-year wait list, it's probably not going to be your first thing that you talk about.
Right. Yeah, I love that example because I feel like around here in Southwest, at least in Cincinnati area where I'm at, I feel like housing is like this hush hush, like secret information for people whose kids are like of a certain age. You know, you're kind of like in that transition period. You're starting to put your kids on like waiting lists and things, and you're trying to talk to like the 1 or 2 places that actually do housing in Cincinnati. But everybody's real quiet about it because I just know that there's just a lack of resource. And it's kind of like, if you're privileged, you'll figure this out, but it's still really hard. Um, what about everybody else though? Like, and so that transparency of information is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And I mean, if we could just get all 88 counties and public housing authorities to do that and kind of use that example, that's a perfect legislative advocacy, approach that we could take. So you just gave
Mhm.
us a starting point because I've been kind of wondering, like, you're right, it's such a huge area of need, but there's so many complex issues. And I always think about it like a statewide issue, but I think you're right that it is like a local issue, and talking to our local leaders and like what they're doing is really important. And kind of like, where the direct support professionals are is where we need to build, or where we need the housing, because it's kind of dumb to like build housing or to have all this housing where there's nobody to do the work. And I think that's kind of what happens sometimes because there's nowhere to. We want to build these like big high rise places for people with disabilities, like way out in some area where no one's
Way
working.
off where there's no access to
Right.
transportation, there's no sidewalks, there's
Yep.
it's we've had that conversation of, it's unintentionally creating segregated housing because
Right.
you're creating a 100-unit apartment complex that is going to only house people with disabilities, that there's no access to transportation, they're disconnected from the community.
Yeah.
There's no retail, there's no employment, there's nothing nearby that people can easily get to. That's not creating good housing opportunities in the community. I know when I was in Dayton, the housing authority there, because the center had worked a lot over the years with the housing authority there to raise the issue of you don't have enough accessible housing in your portfolio. And they had put in, there was a federal program that will probably never be fully funded enough to see this come to reality. But they had put in their application for this program, and it would have actually taken, and they would have knocked down some of their larger, 10-floor tower type apartments, and they wanted to build multiple 3-floor apartment buildings all over the county,
Yeah.
in all neighborhoods, all communities, and everything, and even make some of them, mixed units of not just all low income housing, have market priced housing. So it's creating even better housing opportunities. And that, like I said, I know that the millions upon millions of dollars probably will never show up to see that fully go, that all of it can be done at once. But planning for housing in that way of, we need to create actual opportunities. We need people to be able to access their community. And there's always going to be the fights that we run into of people don't want to see an apartment complex built in their neighborhood. They don't want to see that. It goes into the attitudes that we have to fight. But
Stigma.
it's also finding those people, finding those community leaders in your area that are working in housing, and asking the question, how is disability represented in your work? Who in your work groups is
Yeah.
representing disability in the housing side of things?
Yes. That's exactly the question that
Mm-hmm.
we need to be asking, because it's not uh an easy issue by any means, and it's not quick. So a lot of politicians shy from it. So the ones that are working on it, we need to get behind them and ask these questions and try to help them, build the resource in if they don't already have it. And, people from your organization could help. People, we could always find people at the ARC that could help. It's what I'm always, whenever we have a meeting with a leader in our local or state level, or even on the federal level, we're there to educate and to offer a resource. We want to advocate and get you where we want you to go, but we also are like, we want to help you learn, why you need to do this and why it's so important. And just having people with disabilities that are like, I can't tell you how many people where they're helping me advocate for some bill and they're having housing issues themselves. Like even Michael Denglinger, who we just had on the podcast a couple weeks ago, was almost homeless at one point. And it's like, I don't think there's anything, you can't advocate and you can't do anything else unless you have somewhere to live. And it's just such a huge issue. Thank you, Jeremy. This has been,
amazing.
I've learned so much. I took so many notes. I really appreciate your time and expertise. And really quick, one more time, kind of give the email or web address and any other info you want to share right now so that people can get a hold of you, especially if they want to apply to be on the council.
Yes, of course. Our website is ohiosilc.org. On the website, you can find all the information about our council members, our council meetings, the application process. And my email address is jmorris, MORRIS, at ohiosilc.org. So yeah, anytime anyone, if there's questions, if there's ways that we could get involved in things, because I loved getting to talk with you all today and find out what's going on. It's important for us to be able to all connect and talk and hear the stories that are happening to individuals in the community across the entire state, because that's how we're going to help come together better.
Exactly. We all have to be working together. And like you said, we do everything too, but I'm always trying to specify our advocacy as much as I can, because we're really not going to make much progress unless we pinpoint some things and then all work together on it. So I appreciate this. This has been helpful for me as an advocate, and I know that the people listening learned a lot. So thank you, Jeremy Morris from the Statewide Independent Living Center. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you all.